Yeah, it's awesome. 12:57. How's everybody doing? Are you guys getting your stuff done for Christmas? You got all your shopping done? Or are you like most people? What do we got going on here? Turbo cams! Or are we waiting till the last minute? Like a lot of people. I think all of mine's done. I think we're good. Although I do tend to go crazy on Christmas and get lots of stuff for everybody because that's my jams. Christmas is my favorite holiday. So hopefully everyone's doing good. Doing a lot of stuff today. Actually, Jimmy and I were both looking at a way to get cylinder heads available at richardholdnerperformance.com on the store because I want to put together a package that is like, my goal is to put together like a 500 horsepower package for 5.3s. And we know that it takes a 5.3, if it's a flat top 5.3, even better, but it's going to take, good ported heads. And then, we're talking about naturally aspirated. 500 with a turbo is just put a turbo on it, but really good head, good heads, a big camshaft, a good intake manifold, all that stuff. So I'd like to put together a package like that so guys can duplicate that. I get a lot of questions on how can we do it. And we're looking at it, it's really easy to do. It's not hard, just really good ported heads, like a Airflow Research CNC head or a TrickFlow CNC head, or even really good, properly ported from Total Engine Airflow, a set of factory ported heads that are done right with bigger valves and all that stuff and chamber work. And then, a big cam like the BTR Stage 4 LS3 camshaft that we have up on the site, something like that. Summit Stage 4, there's lots of good cams that will allow you to get there. We've done it with a number of different camshafts. And then a good intake manifold, your fast manifold, or your, any number of short runner, higher RPM manifolds. I was talking to the guys at Summit, talking to Brian about testing their intake manifold that they offer now. And so we can try that. So that's the way to do it. But we want to try to do it, as affordably as possible. So to see if we can do it. It would be really cool to be able to do it with stock heads. And we might be able to get that done. I've gotten close with a flat top piston 799 headed thing with a pretty good sized camshaft in it. So maybe we could get there with a stock head. So that'd be interesting. Maybe that's another good discussion for another day. Today we want to talk about turbos. The thumbnail that I have up is me posing, as I often do, because I'm there by myself. I'm at the dyno by myself. It's there's nothing to do. I have to entertain myself. So it's me posing with the compound turbo setup that we did. Just turbos I happen to have laying around. I get, because you always get experts in the thing that have done, and not by experts, I just mean guys that have done, compound turbo stuff, particularly on LS motors. But a lot of other guys chimed in on guys that have done it on diesels or imports or whatever they're doing. They're like, oh no, you need to do this. You need to do this kind of math. And you need this turbo needs to be this and this. I'm like, look, you are 100% missing the point of this test. This is like, okay, to run a turbo thing, you need, dedicated equal length long tube headers feeding the turbos, and you got to have a, you could just list off all of these things that you have to make it perfect. I'm like, you're missing the point. The point wasn't that here's how the best way to do a compound turbo setup. The point was, I have two turbos. I have an LS motor. So therefore I am, I think I'm obligated to build some kind of super Richie compound turbo setup. Just like I could have one turbo going into the other and we could make a lot of boost and in my opinion, not make that much power relative to the boost pressure that's there. Cause that's how I correlate efficiency is I correlate it by here's my NA power. And then here's how much power we made under boost, and compound stuff doesn't work that well. It works good for doing the thing that it's doing, but it never seems to make as much power at the same boost level as not having compounds. Same thing with when we have a blower on there. If we have a blower and we have a turbo or turbos like we did on the modular Ford, blowing into the supercharger, the boost that we get from that setup is always very high relative to the power output. Because if we just run turbos on it, and that was my question. We'll put this up as the poll too. Okay, does compound, oh, we gotta put my O in there. Does a compound turbo setup make more power than a conventional twin turbos at the same boost level? Oh. Okay. Do compound turbos make more power than twin turbos? Basically, is what we're asking for, and I'm asking it at the same boost level, because then it skews the answer a little bit in my favor. Just as a for instance. So the question becomes, when I put this setup together with the compound deals, I'm like, look, these are just two turbos that I had. And so we made one going into the other, and then we did it because I hadn't run compound turbos on the LS. And so now I have, that's all I cared about. I wasn't trying to show them the best way to do it or even a good way to do it. This is just a way to do it. And we did it, and it made boost, which we liked. And I also made a mistake the first time, which is good because it shows people potential mistakes that they could make. It's much better for the guys on YouTube or whatever to making mistakes, because then it does two things. One, for me, it helps demonstrate to people, hey, look, this is something to look out for. If you're spraying brake cleaner on your rag, don't also light that rag on fire, because it bursts into flames. So if you're welding by it or whatever, or sparks, don't do that. That's an important safety tip. Same thing with this compound setup. When I first did it, I had the wastegates on the primary turbo exiting out to atmosphere. Well, you can't do that because you're bypassing a lot of the exhaust for the second turbo. And then once we route that in and all of the exhaust is going to all the turbos, then everything magically worked. But that's an important thing for guys to understand. The other thing that it does, showing them what not to do, shows them what you should do. But it also gives ammunition for people to complain about. And then let's face it, that's really what they want in the comments. They want to be able to point out that, you did something wrong and we're going to say something about it. And a lot of times, whether you did something wrong or not, they're going to say that anyway, because that's what people like to do. But if you spoon feed them that thing, then they can make a comment about it, and then they're happy. And that's what I want to do, is we want to make people happy. But on the compound setup, I can tell you that, if we have two turbos that are the same size, or on a compound setup, one's going to be bigger than the other so that you could, get better response and stuff. But if neither one of those turbos is bigger than the two turbos that you have in a twin setup, it's going to be no contest. Whatever has the most turbo or turbos is going to be able to make the most power. So however you size the turbos, like we talk about every time when we talk about turbos here, the turbos dictate the power. So whatever the flow rates of those turbos are, their size and their cool impeller design and their hot side and whatever that is, that's going to dictate the power. The other things that you're doing to that are secondary to that. And so whether it's a compound thing and you want to get good response, or you want a really high pressure ratio for some reason, if you want to do all that, that's fine. But the amount of turbos that you have and their attending flow rates is going to ultimately dictate the power. So know that going in. So even if you have sequentials, or you have compound, or you have just regular twins, and we saw that when we did that also came into play when we did the compound setup with turbos blowing into a supercharger. It's cool. And I look at it more in reverse, not that it's compound. I mean, it's compound and it's cool, but I look at it like, okay, we have the supercharger to help spool the turbos. Because instead of a 300 horsepower motor, now we have a 450 horsepower motor because we have a blower on it. Now it's a 450 horsepower motor spooling the turbos. That's the way that I view it. I don't view it that, hey, look, we're compounding this and one is good, so more is better. Because in every instance when we've done that, if we just take the blower off and just let the turbos run, it will make more power. It'll especially make more power at any given boost level. So if we were to run the compound setup and run 20 pounds of boost, like on a blower and a turbo thing, or just run 20 pounds of boost from the turbos, the 20 pounds of boost from the turbos will make way more power than 20 pounds of boost from the turbos blowing into a blower. The one thing that will happen is if the turbos are big, depending on how much power you're trying to make, if the turbos are good size, and or if you have a small motor and a combination of those two things, if you put the blower on, you can spool those turbos up much quicker. And so you have more enjoyable boost. You have a broader power curve because the boost came up sooner. That's all beneficial. Plus, let's face it, it's a compound setup. So you have turbos blowing into a blower or a turbo blowing into a blower, depending on how you've done it. And that's awesome. That's way better when you're having a discussion with somebody. You guys are out, you're having drinks with your buddy, or standing around, or cars and coffee, or just bench racing, and people start throwing out stuff. Yeah, I got a junkyard turbo LS. Great, I have a compound turbo LS, and so you win. So that's, and let's face it, a lot of times that's why we're doing all of this, anyways. Today, like I said, we're also, so that's our turbocharged discussion. Today we were also talking about cylinder heads. So I'm looking into a couple of different avenues to get a good, affordable cylinder head up on the channel. Hopefully one that we could, we're going to sell it and spend all the money on. We get to make a little bit of money off of it. So, but it has to be, primarily, it has to be an affordable option. So we were looking into porting stock heads, which has its own problems. We've looked into a bunch of stuff. I talked to the guys from K-Tech today about their deal. We're looking into a bunch of different new options now. One of the things I would like to do is try the cylinder heads that Tony used on his 5.3 and see if there was, is there something wrong with those heads? That I don't think so, but we would like to try that, and I'd like to test that and see how they compare to stock heads. And so we have to do a lot of, which is good for you guys, we have to do a lot of testing. So if whatever combination I choose, whatever cylinder heads we choose, we want to make sure, obviously, that they're going to work. I'm primarily interested in the 4.8 and 5.3. I'll to a little bit extent the 6.0. The 6.0 is easy to get heads for because it's a bigger bore, but getting them to work on the smaller bore stuff works. And oddly enough, that's actually not as big a problem as I'm making it out to be, and as a lot of people make it out to be. Because if you put a set of 243 or 799 heads on, the chamber is way bigger. It is. It's bigger than the bore as it overhangs the bore. The valve size is bigger in those heads and in a lot of aftermarket heads, but they flow more, and they flow more even on that bore size because they're bigger. They flow more, and then aftermarket heads are the same way. There are a lot of aftermarket heads that right now are not offered as being able to, that you can put them on the 4.8 or 5.3 bore size, but you can, and I know that you can because we've run them a lot. We've run the 220 trick flow ASCAS heads. We've run the 215 CNC heads. We've run a lot of those heads on the smaller bore, and they work. Yes, the bore size is smaller than the combustion chamber is. That is a thing. Yet when you bolt the head on there and you run it, it still makes a lot of power and still works. Does it work as good as if you could put it on a bigger bore? It probably doesn't flow as much, but if you're only using 250 CFM of the available 300, it doesn't make any difference. You're way more, you're not using any of what the head has to offer. So it doesn't make any difference that it flows 6 or 8 or 10 CFM less because of the bore size that you're testing it on when you have 30 more than you need. So none of that really matters. So all of those things are things to consider when we're talking about all of this stuff. Like, do you already have enough? And that's important. But we're looking at all that so we can have, hopefully we can have packages, and then guys will be able to figure out, hey, look, if we just duplicate this, all the things are good. And then we will run those packages both on the engine dyno and on the chassis dyno. And then we'll even take them out and hopefully run them, out in some event, out in the real world. There's only one quote on that because the real world goes the other way. Knowledge, what's going on? Jet, Bo, Michigan's in the house. Sean, compounds give a much larger range. It's nice to have 10 psi at 1300 RPM and still have boosted 8500 RPM. That would be a neat trick if you could have all of that. Load them up. More power. I'm going to say no. Best intercooler for high compression. That's an interesting combination. The best intercooler is the one that gives you the lowest charge temperature, but that usually also is the one that has the most restriction. So you're going to have to play that game between those two. And the best intercooler for high compression is better octane fuel, like E85. Forge 5.3 twin turbo is my dream. Get a hold of BTR. Oh, got a hold of BTR earlier. To use a BTR trunnion upgrade, you got to have 2007 or newer valve covers. The older ones won't fit. There is a difference in the valve covers, in the inside portion, basically, the way that they baffle them and stuff on the valve covers. So it's important. Compound turbos with methanol. Yeah, you can do all of that. Again, I don't know why you would, considering the fact that we can make, with just 2 turbos, we can easily go to 2000 and go beyond that if we turbo appropriately. 4-stock bones, 4.8 bone stock GT35. If you're asking, will it work? Yes, it will work, because the GT35 will support like 600 horsepower probably, and the 4.8's not going to make that much. You got to check and see whether you use a T3 version of that, which might be a little on the small side. Single or better than twins. Twin turbos rated at 400 each, or a single twin scroll rated at 800. What would be best? They both will do the same thing. I don't know that a GT35 is going to support 10 pounds of boost on that, on a 4.8. Let's see. $566. Yeah, it might just support that. The back pressure is going to get high though on that, at that power level. 6 pounds, yeah, 10 pounds is going to be starting to push it. Was Rick Dobertine the first turbo and supercharger together? No, not even close. I mean, that had been done for years and years and years. He did it on the Pro Street car, but that was definitely a cool car. For crazy low RPM single, you just need to size the turbo or turbos accordingly for whatever like boost onset RPM you want. Sean, congratulations on the milestone. Yes, 1 million views on one of my on one of my videos. It's been a long time, but no, it was awesome. And we're going to do a giveaway this weekend. So we're going to do a cam giveaway this weekend. Richard's like an AI that runs engine simulations. You just ask it. Hit the like button. 82 people. We got 98 and only 31 likes. So you better get those likes up. Building an Express van. I like it already. You had me at Express van. Solid front axle, lift, 37 tires, 430 gears. Going to be towing 10,000 plus trailer, and looking for recommendations of upgrading the 6-liter. Probably go build a 408 stroker out of that. More turbos equal, or a 6-liter and boost will do it too. More turbos equal more boost, but it's an amps voltage thing, how you plumb them. Texting on my son's phone. Chevy truck, single turbo, bone stock GT35. Will it work? Not looking for huge power. Looking for 2,000 to 3,000 high torque. Worried about back pressure. You don't have to worry about back pressure at that RPM. The back pressure is going to increase with engine speed. So you're not going to have high back pressure at 2,000 or 3,000 RPM. Richard, you're talking max power, amps voltage. Where do you want the power and how efficiently? Well, I was asking about which one makes more power. So hybrid motors also spool the turbos. Anything down low that creates exhaust gas spools the turbos. Yeah, I'm familiar with how they work. Last week, I asked about T3 versus T4 turbos because I'm currently building a 5.3 with a Truck Norris cam, forged pistons and rods. I have 2 sets of heads that have been ported. Okay. Yeah, the turbo choice is always the first consideration is power. How much power do you want to make? And then there are other considerations like response rate and what are you using it for and how early do you want them to come? Well, response rate is how early that you want them to come on, all that stuff. But first thing, choose your power output. 706 and 317s. I have a turbo I took off of a Cummins, an HX40. I also have the downpipe and exhaust. My goal is 700, 800 daily. Is that turbo worth using? You won't get that out of a single one. Richard, love the channel. If I put twin VS 7875 next gen turbos on a 5.3 with the bottom end, upgraded heads and valve train ARP to hold them down, could I make 1800? Your 1800 is going to be beyond what the stock block and the stock crank are probably going to want to do. You might be able to make that for a run or two or whatever, but it's not going to be 1800 is way beyond where you should be doing it with a stock block. I just run an NA setup with my 706 heads until I can afford a proper turbo. Yeah, and turbos are cheap. I mean, you're talking about 2 GT45s you probably could get for $600. And that's 1,500 horsepower with the turbos. So turbos are cheap right now. But get them now before the pricing goes up. High RPM, high boost, hard rev limiter like AK-47 just for fun. An LY6 twin GT35R T4 BTR stage 2 twin turbo cam, ARP head studs, injectors, turbo 400, pump gas 93 made 736 all the way through the curve on 14 psi. Went 960s at 141, foot braking it nice. Yeah, that's enough turbo to do 1,000 if they're the right GT35s. But on pump gas, that's a really big number on pump gas. Eric's PRI cam session, a guy stated as valve size goes up, cam duration can go down and retain the same power level. Never heard this before testing. I don't think people, I think people that make absolute statements like that are almost never universal. What is the maximum safe RPM for stock rotating assembly of an LS, knowing that you have good valve spring upgrade? A valve spring is not going to allow you to run more engine speed. Well, it is and it isn't. A valve spring is not the thing that's holding you back. If you want to run lots of engine RPM, you have to have a stable cam. And a lot of times, more spring rate on an unstable cam profile makes the setup way worse. So you can't just cure it with valve spring. You have to have a stable cam profile to be able to run lots of RPM. The bottom end part of it is not the issue. It's almost always valve train. We run lots of junkyard motors to, like that one that we have goes to 7,700, and it's got 100 runs like that. How much drivetrain loss is expected in a 3/4 ton 4x4 on around 550 wheel horsepower? I don't know, because I don't know what transmission you have. I don't know what your tire size is. I don't know what your rear end is. All of that can be a lot. On a trophy truck, it could be 200 or 250 horsepower. Just got 2 max speeding GT35s for a 350 Oldsmobile to replace a GT45. T3 is not too small. If you're putting twin GT35s on it, it's not going to be a problem. If you have a single GT35 on a 350 Oldsmobile, unless it's stock and all you care about is low boost, a single GT35 on a T3 is probably going to be too small. You can just use rocket anti-lag. Just put fuel and air where the pre-cat goes. It's like NOS. Yeah, nobody's going to do that on a street car. The goal is 1,800 on E85 due to class rules. Motor's going in a Ford Escort van with 28-inch radials. Probably going to turbo 400. I want turbos for the boost. Well, you just, if 1,800 is and you're going to be using it at 1,800, then you need an aftermarket block. I don't know how many runs you could run with a stock block at that power level. I think that's good. I think the stuff's going to be moving around too much. How are you going to mount the LS in the Fox body? What K-member for ease of install and adapter? I don't know. Right now, it has a tubular K-member designed for a Windsor motor. So I don't know if somebody makes the tubular K-member to mount the LS, or we would adapt it. I just need to look into it and see if, I think Holley has LS Fox swap stuff. So I just need to look into it and see what we would use. I'm trying to get the class to think big picture. Reason I ask is because the tuned a 3.7 slant 6 psi turbo, 500 plus torque, very low RPM. Yeah, a slant 6 is going to be a low RPM motor. It would surprise me if it made more horsepower than torque. They usually don't, unless you put a good sized cam and port the head and change the intake manifold and stuff. Have you seen the new Cannon Valve cathedral port heads at BTR? Yeah, I saw them long ago. You see them, they make 10 horsepower more than the best AFR heads. That wouldn't surprise me if you're free to design a Cannon valve head, particularly, you should be able to make more than an inline valve head. And you have guys there like Brian Tooley and also Rick Smith, who started TrickFlow, who know a lot about making power from cylinder heads. Rick has done a lot of stuff other than the TrickFlow related stuff. He's done a lot of stuff behind the scenes with a lot of really well-known guys. Rick's a legend, so they know how to make power there. Anything HB Tuner standalone ECU? I haven't heard of that, so I certainly haven't tried it. Been trying to find an adapter plate and I failed. I don't want to remove everything to do the K member again due to the cost. In the winter, I was told they cannot use my small block Ford K member and adapter plates. So are you just having trouble with motor mounts for that? Cleveland Rocks, Cannon valves, yep. Richard, any opinion on twisted wedge heads versus 3 or 4 bar heads with X-Cam regarding piston to valve clearance? A twisted wedge head will have more piston to valve clearance than a GT4EP head will. JDM. So you've got a 496, twin turbos, or an F2 Pro Charger. The twin turbos would make more power, but if you're actually drag racing it, a lot of guys have to, when they're drag racing, because you can do the things that you need to do with your stall converter and in various forms of anti-lag or quick spool valves, etc., to get the boost up as soon as you want it to be up. A lot of times with turbo stuff, they have to take power away on the turbo stuff to get traction. The boost curve offered by a centrifugal blower like a Pro Charger tends to do that already. So it would be very, very specific which one of those would do well. The turbos would make more power than any supercharger, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will go quicker, because it's power versus traction on those drag race things. I have an LQ4 799 heads. I have a Summit big nasty cam. I want a daily driver. What's the best cam for big horsepower but still a daily? I don't know what your actual definition is between those two things. Like, I don't know what the ratio is. I want all the most power I can, and I also want to be a daily driver. Well, there's a compromise in there somewhere, and I don't know which side of the compromise you're more interested in. The big nasty cam, I think, would have an idle quality that I wouldn't want in a daily driver. And I don't think it makes as much power, enough power to justify its idle quality. We try the Hellcat blower soon. I don't know. I haven't heard back from that guy. What's best for a remote mount? Like a truck bed mount, twins or big single, drag and drive, nothing radical. It doesn't matter. Either the single or twins is just a preference. You can make them do the same thing if you size the turbos to do what you want. Canted valve head is a poor man's Hemi. I would argue that a canted valve is better than a Hemi. Just trying to find a correct way before removing the 351 and trying to reuse some of it. Just check the 3.7 slant 6 ran 6 psi. The 11 plus. 4.8 should make the same curve higher, but 0 turbo lag with a GT35. Yeah, if you have a turbo and you can keep the boost the same through the whole tested RPM range, the power curve is exactly the same as it is stock, as it is NA. Am I testing on LS416 Turbo 400? I saw 233 horsepower loss. 583 gear, 9-inch, 37-inch tires. Yeah, it can be a lot on big tire stuff. It can be a lot. Does anybody here run half-mile stuff? I plan on running half-mile and Texas mile. I'm just curious if anybody's run half-mile stuff. I haven't done that. I did one standing mile thing, but I did it for Vortec in their Mustang, in their supercharged Mustang. I just wondered how much power it took to do 200 and a half mile. Doorbell gave me flashbacks to my grandparents. Would run Rich one or big tire or a small tire? I wouldn't be drag racing. I'm interested in top speed stuff. And standing mile and half mile stuff is kind of like that. I did like doing we did the standing mile stuff in the Sprint Turbo. And we went 119. Just do the same mods you do to a 6.2, but you have to understand the 6.2 always going to be more powerful because it starts off more powerful. Yeah. More than a 5.3, is that what you're talking about? Bandit, in your combination, you need some sort of aftermarket block. And the nice thing with an aftermarket block is you wouldn't do a 5.3. What a lot of guys are doing, like if you talk to the guys from Brian Tooley, I think that their combination that they like to do is a 388. Because I think that they've tried 427s and other things. They may have been doing it in class specific deals where you had to run, they were limited maybe on turbo size or something. Am I going to regret buying the Hooker LS swap manifold and crossover pipe by the Trans? It's expensive for a hot side that isn't complete. And then need to buy adapter mount for the turbo. I don't know. You should look online. There should be a lot of inexpensive stuff. Half is 1,100. Depends on weight. Yeah, it's a Fox Mustang, so the weight, not too much of a concern. Compound turbos would just allow instant boost, right? Would have nothing to do with overall power. They may or may not allow instant boost depending on how you have it set up. Someone asked how you could make a 5.3 as powerful as a 6.2. Well, it'd be really hard if they both have the same modifications. It'd be real easy to make a 5.3 make the same power as a stock 6.2 by modifying the 5.3. And then eventually, if it's a 6.2 aluminum block, the 5.3 eventually is going to pass it if you do boost, because the 6.2 won't take as much boost as an iron block or even an aluminum block 5.3 will. Twin GT35s will be on a slightly modified 350 Oldsmobile engines and an 1,800-pound altered, running no prep so far. Our currently runs 1020s at 12 pounds with a single GT45. Okay. So you should be able to run twice as fast with twins, right? I can do 200.5 with 220 wheel horsepower on your bike. Will a bike go 200.5 mile in with 220 wheel horsepower? Are you excited about the new 5.5 twin turbo Corvette? They said it has 12-to-1 compression, running 93. Yeah, I think it's cool. I think the technology in that is awesome. They can run higher compression. I think that's also a direct injected motor too. Is a direct injected and port injected motor like they did on the blower LT stuff, the LT5 stuff? What I would like to see is I'd like to see somebody put more gear in that car. I know that car will go more than 233. Any information about a Comp CT4 RX Turbo? I've never tested one, so I don't have any information about it, but they should have maps or something on it. Tim, happy to help, man. How could you get the 5.3 to stock 6.2 power? Well, if you take a look at, I have lots of 5.3 videos where we've made 500 horsepower, and a stock that's more than a stock 6.2 does. A 6.2 LS3, the way that we run it on the engine dyno, the way that we test these 5.3s, makes 495 when it's stock, with headers and an open throttle body and a Mazir electric pump and properly tuned and stuff. That's what they make, about 495, a stock LS3. And that's the most powerful 6.2 that we've run. And to get a 5.3 to make 495 is, like I said, it takes ported heads and a big cam and an intake manifold. But we have one that made 540. So you can certainly do that. But it doesn't make the low speed power that 6.2 does, because 6.2 is always going to make more torque. Chopper Cabra and Pro Charger coming soon. 5.3. I built it myself. There you go. That'd be good. How much is boosters reliable on a stock 6-liter? You should ask how much power is reliable is kind of what you want. Boost is not the indicator there. CX14R, simple bolt-ons and a tune. Turbo high boosted does it quicker, I would imagine. Tuning question: is there a way to tune for peak torque reading plugs on a boosted engine? You would, if you're trying to get the most torque, you're in the maximum detonation area. So I would like some knock sensing technology there. You can read the plugs if you're good at reading plugs, and it will start to tell you when it can become problematic, before it can become problematic. I don't know that you're going to get the last 2 or 3 or 10 or whatever the number is, but there are guys that are really good at plug reading by reading the ground strap on it. At how much horsepower would you recommend reinforcing a truck frame? This build I'm currently working on is going in a F-150. That's a V6 with a 5-speed, so 700-800 at that point. I don't know how much. Are you talking about frame strength and stuff? I don't really have a feel for that. Can you dial in more torque with advancing the cam? Yes and no. You can't dial in more peak torque oftentimes. Sometimes you can dial in. Sometimes you can dial in. You can shift the torque curve by making more torque down low sometimes, and then trading it at the top. Sometimes advancing it doesn't do anything. So always advancing it doesn't always do the thing that you're asking about. Why do baby people? What's a baby person? Use metal high rime intakes on turbo applications versus like an LSXR or MSD Atomic. I don't know. I don't know why they do that. I'm assuming that they're looking for more engine speed, because that's why you would use those their shorter runner intake manifolds. My setup is a 70 Chevelle 9-inch turbo 400, 496 half filled airflows, leaning towards an F2, but your 871s. The 871 videos. Yeah, I would pick an F2 over an 871. An F2 is going to make a lot more power than an 871. if you can put all that power down. That becomes the thing. The power versus traction thing becomes the issue if you're drag racing. Plug reading is becoming a lost art. The nice thing, though, is online, there's a lot of information that show pictures on directly how to read plugs. Some of the problems, though, is you know, like anything, you have to do it a lot to understand it. And then you have to do it like and make a run and shut the motor off and then take the plug out and go, oh, okay, look, here's where the line is on the ground strap. This, you get a little jeweler's loop, look in there. Maybe we're getting 1 or 2 speckles. You don't want too many speckles on there. We're getting some detonation because the little shiny things that you see on the porcelain oftentimes came from the piston, and you don't want that. How much power can we safely make with a stock bottom end? Well, we made 1,500 horsepower with a stock bottom end 6-liter at 29 pounds, and the motor's still alive. So I don't recommend that, and I don't think you could go use that for very many runs like that. But there's lots of guys making, 1,000 horsepower or more. Found you a couple weeks ago for videos on Mopar Gen 3 engines. My plan is to cam it with a comp cam kit, add ring gap, new gaskets over this winter. That's good. Also look or talk to the guys at Brian Tooley Racing about I don't know what year your Hemi is. If it's late enough, the guys from Brian Tooley Racing also have cams, but Comp has a lot of cams for the earlier ones. I call them the Gen 3s, and I call the later ones Gen 4s, but I guess technically they're all Gen 3s. Next winter, twin turbo, looking for 450 horsepower NA, 800 twin turbo for a daily driver. What kind of cam would you choose? I would use if you look at the cams I have at richardholdnerperformance.com, I like smaller cams for turbo stuff because it spools the turbo up faster. And 450 horsepower NA is really easy to get if that's a 5.3. That's just a cam. I don't think 800 horsepower with turbos is really easy to do, starting with if you put the low buck truck camshaft in there, you'll have good boost response. That will make like 420, 425. And then the bigger truck plus cam will make 440. I would be less concerned about that NA number difference. You can put ported heads on it or put a fast manifold on or whatever, and then you're over your number. But I would be less concerned about that than I would be about the boost response. I always pick the smaller cam and then let the turbos do the work for making the power. Put 1,000 horsepower turbo or twins that will make 1,000 horsepower, and then making 800 is really simple. It's just boost. LS6 titanium retainers. Adding intercooler after each booster lets you get creative with the plumbing. Reading plugs for max torque tuning is yesterday. You got to add torque till the rod's bent and back it off. Yeah, it's much better to have some sort of knock sensor thing telling you, hey, that's about enough on the timing. Richard, any chance you do a dirt cheap single GT35 on a bone stock 4.8 for old dads that want more grunt, low buck truck, and tell us where it chokes out? Would be a neat test with an intercooler and no cooler. So you want to run a turbo that's too small on a motor and then also run no intercooler? I think that's not a good choice. Have you ever worked with Ferrari engines? Yeah, I've owned one. We didn't do any mods to it though. But they respond like everything else. It's just more expensive to do that. After looking at the exhausts, because I had the 2B exhaust on my 355, and I really wanted to put turbos on there. Lifters, all 7 lifters, push rods. Michigan Motorsports cam. Big nasty cam. 218, 230. Okay. Is this a safe cam for daily driver? If not, what would you recommend? Yeah, it will work fine. It's only a 550 lift cam. The reason that I wouldn't choose it for my particular vehicle is that I think that the people wanting a cam because of the idle quality, I'm not that buyer. I would rather have less chop, than more chop. And if I have to sacrifice, if I have to have an idle quality where there's idle quality issues, I would only do that if I had not a 218 cam. I would only do that if I had a 230 or a 235 cam, where you're getting the benefit is like the trade-off is, yeah, the idle quality is not that great, but we have lots and lots of power. I'm building a 5.3 LC9 twin turbo for a Corvette with the best parts I can get. Hope it will hold 30 PSI long enough. 30 PSI is going to be a lot of power. Do you have all the other things that are going to go along with that? Have you ever tested a stock cam aftermarket heads on an LS? Yes, many times. I've only seen one dynograph from a long time ago, and it showed good torque, but nobody has done it since. Yeah, why are you thinking that if you put aftermarket heads with something that has a stock cam, you get very little change in power? Not because the heads don't work, but because they don't have anything to work with. There's nothing asking them for more airflow. But I've done that on the LS3. I think I did trick flow heads, the 205 heads with a stock cam also. And the same kind of thing. We just didn't see much of a gain. We did see a gain when we had a turbo and then did that head swap on, I can't remember if it was a 4.8 or a 5.3, but we did see a change in power with the turbo. And again, it also matters what you're starting with and what you're ending with. Like on the LS3, we already had way more cylinder head than we needed, especially with the stock cam and all that. We already had more than 600 horsepower with a turbo, and we're making less than 500. So, I mean, not with a turbo, with the stock cam, but with those heads, we were making about 500 horsepower, 495. And so we put heads on now that could support 700 horsepower, but we already had 600 horsepower heads on, and we were only making 500. That's why we didn't get much of a gain. If you have heads that will only support 300 and your motor's making 300, and then you put ported heads on it, then you'll get more of a gain. Single turbo daily driver, what size injectors? I always err on the bigger injector side. So small cam, big injectors for a turbo. And the daily driver and injector size are not related to each other. You should put big enough injectors in for later on when you want to turn the boost up. So we normally go on my store, we have like 80-pound injectors and 1,000 cc injectors. So either one of those will work. 5.3 sloppy stage 2 cam and spring LS1 intake, 600 wheel horsepower goal. Can you recommend a turbo that will have the quickest response possible? Yeah, we should have a turbo for that, but like an S369, I think is one of the ones that we're testing that should have response. And honestly, I don't think you want boost at 2,000 RPM because it's going to be hard to run things. You're going to be more detonation prone if you do that. But 600 wheel horsepower is not hard at all for that combination. What do you think is the best way to avoid restriction with an intercooler? Just you have to size it properly. That's really easy. You have to size it for the combination of pressure drop and cooling. So you want it to flow enough, but you also want to cool enough. And if you size it properly, you get both of those. Really interested in seeing the results on BTR LS3 heads. Will they yield higher torque in 2,000 to 4,000 RPM range on a 6.2 stock displacement? How about a 416, an LS7? I have all three displacement engines. I think you'd be hard pressed to do all of that. But if they have new LS3s, I wasn't familiar with the LS3 heads, but if they have new ones, that would be good. I think, and the thing that Brian and I have been talking about for years, probably 10 years now, is that I think we were both of the same opinion that a stock LS3 head, the port was too big. And I think that the valve is too big too, that they could do what they're doing in terms of flow with both of those things much smaller. I'm putting an F355 engine in a 240Z. Any advice on getting an adapter plate made for a trans? Yeah, it's going to have to be a custom thing. But that's not a hard thing to do. I mean, that's just a plate that allows you to bolt up a more common transmission to that. Got an M90 that cut the intake side off. Plan is to make a flange and adapt a DCOE carb off the back of the supercharger. This will be on top of a 4.3 V6. I think you're going to restrict it quite a bit by doing that. There's no DCOE carb that I know of that's going to flow more than like the 92 millimeter or 105 millimeter throttle body that you should have going into that M90. So I think that ultimately that's going to be restrictive. It's going to be cool. Don't get me wrong, but it needs at least 2 of those. It has an aftermarket 8 throttle body injection. That's cool. And that 355 motor makes decent power, 375 or whatever, and has a pretty high RPM range, 8,500. And then with the aftermarket throttle bodies, maybe it will make more power. Tyler, I don't know what you mean by what are my thoughts. Everything for 30 PSI, heads, cam, water, air, intercooler, ethanol, Holley Dominator. Okay. Do you have an aftermarket block on that, Bo? Richard, remind us what the conversion percentage is crank to wheel horsepower. There isn't one. It's never a strict conversion. It's never a strict percentage. It will be only in winter because we have 140 degree Fahrenheit ambient temperatures in the summer. You have 140? Where's that at? Is that in the Middle East somewhere? And 140 seems high because the highest temperature ever recorded is below that. And I think the highest recorded temperature is in Death Valley. They're saying a 1. Yeah, the highest official registered air temperature is 134, recorded on July 10th, 1913, Furnace Creek, Death Valley. For a few years, a former record that was measured in Libya until it was decertified in 2012 based on evidence that it was an erroneous reading. It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if in desert areas where there are not people, the temperatures might be hotter than that. 90 to 1,000 wheel, 900 to 1,000 wheel horsepower, going twins or a big single. Either one of them will work. Like I said, you can easily make those numbers with either a single, and it's not even going to be very big. 1,000 wheel horsepower is actually not a very big turbo, not a very big single turbo. Or twins. Twin GT35s will do that. With the Hooker LS swap turbo kit, I will be on my own for turbo mount and complete cold side to the intake. Yeah, but you would be on your own anyways if you're swapping an LS in there. And then what kind of intercooler are you going to use? Is it going to be some sort of front mount air to air? Is it going to be an air to water? And depending on how you put that, you're going to have to buy aluminum tubing and make it all work. I'm from Qatar. Okay. Did I say that right? One last dumb question for me. How much boost do you think the stock block will take? Now considering going for a stock block 5.3, will I learn the car and upgrade? Well, there are guys running more than 1,500 horsepower with 5.3s and drag racing them, but I don't know how many passes they get. And on a 5.3, you can pick either an iron block or the aluminum block 5.3 stuff. But it would be a good idea to get everything working at 700 or 800 horsepower and then slowly dial up the power is what I would recommend. I can testify doing live fire exercises, full battle. Riyadh was 132. My setup, I'm making 550 horsepower. I have a stock bottom end on my 6-liter. What is a safe turbo to get around 800? A VS Racing 7875 will easily do that. They're inexpensive. A BorgWarner S475 is easy to do that. Twins versus singles is always on an ongoing argument. No one tests more than you do. What do you prefer? That choice has nothing to do with which one of those is better. It has everything to do with which one do you like visually and what fits. It's all that's more of a fitment application than it is which one of them is better. There isn't a better one. If you have two 500 horsepower twins or a single 1,000 horsepower single, they both do the same thing. Do you plan on testing the Summit Max EFI intake manifold? Yeah, I think they sent me one. I was just talking to Brian from Summit about that today. How's our poll doing? Does a compound turbo setup make more power than conventional twin turbos at the same boost level? 70% are saying no. Why haven't you heard much about Sloppy and the best cam released years ago? Must not have had the impact on the low buck LS stuff like the Elgin Sloppy Stage 2 of the past. Matt sold a lot of those cams, I think. I'm interested in dyno corrections for humidity, barometric pressure, temperature. Do you know a good source for those equations? Yeah, just go to, I'm sure Superflow, if you do a search on Superflow, that they probably have the correction factors. Will smaller twins spool faster than a big single? No, because you only have half of the energy going to them. I have videos up where we tested singles and twins. It all comes down to the specific turbos that you pick, not as a generalized thing. Oh, twins spool faster. You see that a lot back in the day for magazine articles and stuff. Oh, we picked twins because they spool faster. How did they spool faster if you only have half the exhaust energy going to them? I think you can better refine exhaust sizing options using twins. They're rated for 8,500 RPM, if I'm not mistaken. I'd like to see how they compare to other big name intake manifolds. Yeah, I mean that intake manifold, and this is a conversation I have with Brian. I don't think those short runner intake manifolds are good choices for most people. I think if you're looking at something that goes to 7,000 RPM and it's a cathedral port, you should pick a fast because it's going to have the most average power. If you're looking for high RPM stuff, then the shorter runner manifolds might not be a bad way to go. Aren't twins too complex of an install and tuning for most of us common people? There's more there. Have you seen half mile stuff in United Arab Emirates? I don't think I have. I've seen a lot of the crazy drift stuff that guys are doing and jumping from one car to the other and driving on two wheels and stuff, which I think is, I love the enthusiasm. I think it's awesome. Do a sequential twin boost. Does a sequential twin boost faster? Yes, you can make a sequential setup have more response than like two medium-sized turbos don't spool as fast as a small turbo and a big turbo in a sequential setup. Just want to pop in and say thanks for all the research. Happy to help, Eric. Why do I enjoy driving a Honda Accord more than boosted Mustangs? That's a thing, you know. That's your deal. We all have our thing. I love driving my Sprint Turbo. I love driving my VX. I love driving my Mustang. There. Half mile stuff in the United Arab Emirates. That would be cool to see. I like watching the exotic cars go, and I like listening to them. So I like there's some crazy twin turbo Lamborghinis and stuff that are nuts. The anxiety and stress of driving a turbo Fox body weight reduction piece with no power steering. Why does it have a manual rack on it? Thanks for all the time. And go with twin 7875s or maybe bigger. Go 5.3 to begin with and learn the car and eventually max that thing out. Then maybe 4 years later, build a big block. Okay. Sloppy best cam work got on my 5.3 of the GT45. My CX500 turbo bike runs 19 pounds of boost on no intercooler. Think how much better it would be with an intercooler. I would definitely have an intercooler on a bike, especially an air-cooled one. Is there CX water-cooled? I think it's probably water-cooled, right? That's pretty early, though. Riding my Shadow 600 versus my ZX14 versus a turbo Hayabusa. The looks at 600 is small. Got to run through the gears in town, even just to get to the speed limit. My hand twitches on the bigger bike. I'm over 100. I think that what you're talking about is subjective, because no modern 600 is slow. So just to get to the speed limit, I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I've ridden a lot of 600s, and a 600 just on a freeway on-ramp, you could be going, go to jail speed. I want to put my Fox Mustang back together. It'd be fun to be able to do. Plan on swapping the LS into the Fox body before spring and uploading it all here. Yeah, I will be doing videos on. We'll be doing videos on it. Have you tested the new Summit intake manifold? I have not. I know what it's going to do. Looking at it, it looks to be positioned between a short runner, because it's, according to Brian from Summit, it's like a 5.5-inch runner. So we have 4-inch runner stuff that's like the BTR Trinity and the low ram. And then this, I think, 6.5 stuff that's like the high ram. It's probably going to be in between those two. Bone stock, 4-valve, liquid cooled, 500cc. Physics say the answer is no, because you have more inefficiency with more turbos. The Fox will get an aluminum 5.3. More than likely with forged internals, and then only because it's going to need to be redone. And I have 2 of those now. And then I want to put I'll put one of my cams in it, and then also one of the heads that we want to sell. Steve, you don't have to worry about spool rate. The spool rate, there's no spool rate difference between a single and a twin if you size them correctly. So if spool is your thing, size your turbo for what you want to do. If power is your thing, size your turbo for what you want to do. As power levels go up, and if you have a 6.2, anyway, none of those turbos are going to have a problem spooling on a 6.2. As power levels go up, efficiency of the total system goes down. Do you look at forged pistons rods and treat them like jewelry, or have you become too used to the parts? No, I think that they look great. Most of the things that are new like that, and new and shiny, I don't even like putting them in. We just want to stare at them. But, you know, it's a 5.3 and it's going to get used. So I'm a lot more concerned when I build stuff like that and put it on the dyno than I am about running junkyard motors. Because if I just throw a junkyard motor, if I go get one from the wrecking yard and put it up, I kind of have my fingers crossed that it's going to work, because you have no idea what the thing is, what's inside of it, what kind of sludge and nastiness it has inside of it, how well somebody else took care of it. Was it ever even running on all the cylinders? You put it on there, and like this L33, you know, it's a diamond in the rough. It's awesome. It's been for more than 500 dyno pulls with boost and cams and intake manifolds and carbureted stuff and nitrous and all kinds of stuff. It just worked really well. You don't know that that's going to happen, but you don't care about it, because if it broke, you're like, okay, I'm out $300 or $400 or $500, whatever. You're like, that's okay. I'll just, the heads are worth that. But when you put together a dedicated motor that has forged rods and forged pistons in it and all new stuff, and you put it on there, then I'm like, okay, come on, just be right. Just be right. And then after you start running it for a while, you're like, okay, it's fine. It's fine. It's all good. Hall boy, I don't know what the specs are on any of those cams, so I really couldn't answer that. So if you at least just gave me the intake duration on all those cams, I could make a better choice. Outside of nitro turbos are king. Watch some of your older videos from years ago with you recommended machine work on block heads and studs for people putting those into your car. Yeah, if you're going to put something together and you want it to be together for a really long time, then I think you should build it accordingly. But you could also put this, like if this L33, if I ran it on the dyno and we ran it, it's like, look, it just runs good. Let's just put it in there. My Fox Trap 143 on a junkyard 5.3 at 15 pounds. BS Racing 80 millimeter. Okay. Small BTR cam. Yeah, the camshaft has no bearing on, although it would have a bearing on power at a specific boost level. But since you can max that turbo out with a small cam, if you turn the boost up all the way, you're going to make it with the two cams, two or three different cams. You get to make the same power with all these different cams. I saw a video where a guy said big changes in gear ratios on a shift, power glide blows engines. Well, what he was talking about that, and that's a real thing, is that you have a big split. You're dropping a lot of RPM. And so now what you're doing is you're loading the motor much harder because you're at a lower engine speed. This is particularly the case on turbo stuff if you still have boost. And so you're loading the motor a lot more and for a longer period of time. Because if you have a bunch of gear, you've got short loads till the next gear. And so it's a lot easier on it. That's why power glides have to have, if you have a motor and you're running a power glide in it, you have to have a lot of stall speed normally is one way that they get away from that. But you have to have a much wider power band engine. A little late. What was the answer to the poll? The poll's still up there. And twin turbos make more power than a compound turbo does. Twin GT35, 1050 Garretts to reach 1500 horsepower. I think that those will do that. How does the distance of a carburetor from the engine affect throttle response? Is it distance from the throttle blade to the valve that determines response, or is it throttle distance to the runner entry? I don't know. I don't always know what people mean by response. Are you talking about if you crack the throttle, is it the time between when you crack the throttle and you see the thing reach a certain engine speed? Because for me, response is not that, because that has no effect on other than if you're doing a throttle blip for a downshift, that has no effect on the way that the motor accelerates, because the acceleration rate is not going to be a function of the way that it free revs. The way that it accelerates is going to be a function of the other things that are loading against it. It's going to be vehicle weight and gearing and tire size and traction and aerodynamics and all those things that affect the way that the car accelerates. The way that it throttle blips, for me is not one of those things. But some people, for some people, that's important. Planning on adding more parts? Yes. Had this bike for the last 35 years. The IHI has a 0.35 ratio, spins 180,000 RPM. Safely handled 2,400 or 240,000. That's why all the new cars are flying with these 8 to 10 speeds. That's right. Think about if you shift it in a power glide, you might, what if you drop like 4,000 RPM? So you drop from 8,000 down to 4,000. And now you're loading the thing at 4,000 and having to pull from 4,000 all the way up to 8,000. I know what those are like because I've had transmissions with big gear splits in them. So much so, like on the Bonneville car, the shift between fourth and fifth on the Honda transmission was terrible. And so we had to make it. What I did was we ran much higher engine speed in fourth gear, which is okay because we had just now put all the power down and we're able to have traction. And so we would rev higher in fourth gear to make sure that we were still in VTEC when we shifted into fifth gear. And then fifth gear is when it did all the work. So I think a 4.8 tiny turbo would be the same. Be the same as what? I have some uploads saved from a tuning class. Are there any tuning topics you want to screen record to see? I don't really know what you mean by that. Power glides place a lot of load on the thrust bearing. A friend's 307 HG panel van would do 100 miles an hour in first. Oh, with a power glide. Yeah, they do have pretty steep gearing. My brother's Firebird, his first car, had a power glide in it. I don't remember. I have to ask him, see if he remembers. I don't remember what gear he had in that thing. My Camaro had 308s in it, 307 or a 308. Probably 307, I think, was the Chevy. I took a tuning course for Holly stuff. I want to know if you wanted to see any tuning topics. I could send you a video recording on screen for any topics you're interested in. I have pretty good guys at Westech that I can ask questions for if I wanted to do that, but thanks. I appreciate it. Richard, you're a turbo guy. Please look it up. I don't need to look up a CX500 turbo because I was there when they came out. I know a lot about them, and the GPZ 750s also, and the 83650 turbo. Those are really cool. And if you were an OEM and you have somebody size a turbo for a specific application, they can do a lot with that. And it's cool stuff. I love that they made turbocharged motorcycles from the factory. I thought that was awesome. I thought that we were going to see a lot more of that, particularly for, the thing is that the bike stuff had such high, like, specific power outputs because they were dealing with a lot of engine speed. And, just like Formula One, you can make really high specific horsepower outputs. The torque outputs are not, not the same, but that's where the boost would come in. The boost was awesome for those things because you would have a lot more average power production. And so I thought they were going to do more stuff with the turbo bikes. I think that's pretty cool. Is there a way to contact you directly for help on a build? This is the best place to ask questions because not only will you get my answer, but there's a lot of other guys here that are really sharp. If you're going forge on a 5.3, why not go to a 3.9 stroker? I don't want a stroker motor in it. You don't need a stroker motor if you're going to do a turbo. Trying to figure out how to ask this. Is a short runner intake any better on low RPM with a boosted engine? Better than what? In my opinion, and Brian Tooley has a different opinion of this, and I don't know why he does, but an intake manifold, any intake manifold, whether short runner or long runner, if you provide the same amount of boost through the whole RPM range, the power curve will be exactly the same. So one intake manifold isn't better under boost than it is NA. I think that they do exactly the same thing. I had the Yamaha Seika 650 turbo. Yep. Constantly learning from these. Power wheelie when the boost come on. That's the nice thing about turbo stuff on anything, like on my Sprint or on a, I remember riding in my first turbo car was a CRX with Kip from Turbo Magazine. I'm like, wow, this thing feels like it's faster than my Mustang is. And that's the thing, is they have a lot of torque production. We've got a couple of GPZ 750s at work. I'm not allowed to sit on them. Are they like restored ones or something? Because that would be cool. And back when they had those turbos, or when they had those turbo 750s, they also had the GPZ 1100 and the 900 Ninja, and all of them had really comparable performance. It was kind of cool. How much horsepower will an LQ 460 safely take with a stock mod men? We've made 1500 with one of those. So somewhere less than that. Looking at putting Trick Flow Super 23 heads on the Vortec 350. Those are really good heads. They flow more and have 56 cc chambers. I don't know what you mean by thoughts. Oh, that's a problem with the Hayabusa when the turbo lights in 6th gear doing wheelies at 170. Yeah, an excessive amount of power. That's kind of cool. I've seen a lot of the turbo Hayabusa stuff and other bikes too, not just that. It's the most famous one, I think. But a lot of those at Bonneville. And not just the 1300 stuff, but a lot of turbo 1 liter bikes, because it would be in a specific class. But I can't believe how crazy those guys are and how fast they go. They're original. I work at Kawasaki. Cool. Singles are more efficient until you get to a point where you can't spool at the RPM you want to operate. Then compounds become more efficient. But the question wasn't single versus compound. It was twins. Time to put turbos on the 750 Kawasaki 2-stroke triple. Yeah. Then you'd have the crazy narrow power band. It would just be wildly exaggerated in terms of the power production. on Hooker LS swap turbo kit. Yeah, Tim, I have videos up on that. We had the elbow that I have is a 3-inch V-band and a 90-degree elbow going to a T4 turbo flange, or even another V-band. I don't think we did that on the Hooker one, because I used one of the 90s that we have that we run off of everything else, the single turbos and the twin turbo stuff. And so we ran a 3-inch V-band, had a 90, went up to the T4 flange, we mounted the turbo right there, and then going straight out was the wastegate flange to mount the wastegate. 750 Kawasaki is a Widowmaker. Yeah, those triples were really cool. I remember my buddy had an RD400 when we were in high school, and he always looked up to the triple guys because they were, it was a much faster bike. Is a smaller combustion chamber more prone to detonation? It is only by increasing the compression, but you'd have to look specifically at the chamber design itself and see if the chamber design was more prone to detonation from a design standpoint and not just being smaller or higher compression. .850 turbo, 2 strokes on snowmobiles. Yeah, and but I think that there are 4 strokes. The watercraft stuff too has boosted stuff now. It's pretty cool. What am I doing here? I've been here late. Close out our poll, 68% saying no. And on that note, guess what, guys? Oh, wait, I didn't close out my poll. I got to end the poll here. I will see you guys all later.